Hello and welcome to Where You Lead, a podcast where we, a real-life mother and daughter duo, rewatch Gilmore Girls and discuss the misadventures of fictional mother and daughter duo Lorelai and Rory Gilmore. I am Tess Adair, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I'm Beth, Tess's mom. I am also a writer. We came up with this idea because we used to watch the Gilmore Girls together pretty religiously when Tess was about Rory's age, and I was a little bit older than Lorelai, but in the same kind of life situation. Tess's friends used to compare us to the Gilmore Girls because I was a single mom, and Tess went to a private prep school that we could not afford. So we have always had, in addition to that, we've always had long analytical conversations about movies and TV and music, politics and culture. And when Tess moved to Seattle, we continued those talks over the phone. And sometimes they were pretty long. So one day it occurred to us that we should move these discussions over to the digital world, maybe even into a podcast. And the Gilmore Girls felt like a good place to start. So here we are.
Yeah, and we also at one point mentioned that we were going to talk about how much coffee we've been drinking that day. I am actually on my first cup of coffee, technically. Slow coffee day for me.
It's a slow one for you, and I've already had like 3 or 4. I've had way too much. In fact, you may have to slow me down. So,
well, let's get into it. This episode is called Rory's Birthday Parties.
Yeah, so and each week we start off with a introduction of the episode and a synopsis and the date before we head into the discussion. This is Season 1, Episode 6, Rory's Birthday Parties, as Sarah mentioned, and it would originally aired November 9th, 2000. First scene, dinner.
An overview of the episode is that it's Rory's 16th birthday.
No, it's her 17th birthday. She's been 16.
17th?
Well,
okay.
This is one of the questions in the episode. They never really say, but we were under the impression at the beginning of the show that she was 16. So this is one of the questions of the episode. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did have a question as I was watching, and I was like, I don't think they're saying how old she's turning. Yep. But it's her birthday, and her birthday is falling on a Friday, which is the night that they have dinner with the grandparents. Mm-hmm. So Lorelai tries to get it changed, Emily won't budge, and Rory instead ends up with 2 birthday parties. Because of that, it's the rare episode that covers the town, the grandparents, Chilton, and even Dean all at once.
Yes, so, good point.
So on to the first scene. It's a week before the birthday, and it's a dinner at the grandparents' house where Emily announces that their lawyer is coming over the next day to help them figure out their will, and she wants Rory to go around the house and put Post-it notes on whatever she wants so that they can, I guess, itemize literally every item in their house and say where it's going to go when they die.
And so sometimes we come up with, I don't know about you, but I come up with alternate titles for the episode. Yes. And this one is, for me, put a Post-it on it. That's my alternate title. So, but go ahead.
I like that alternate title. I didn't really mark down an alternate title for this one. Maybe I'll decide as we're going. But I like put a Post-it on it. Kind of the other big thing that happens in this scene is the new kitchen staff person brings out dessert, and dessert is pudding, which Rory and Lorelai are both kind of over the moon about because it's a thing that they like that the grandparents don't seem to get. So this is a sign that Emily is trying to get them a little bit more by bringing out pudding.
So here's my question about this scene. Emily keeps acting like she doesn't know what they're talking about. So do you think she's... Okay, so let me back up and say that they are surprised because it's something that Emily doesn't consider a real food, I guess, or a real dessert, but she made it for them anyway. They feel like this is Emily's concession to their lifestyle and to what they like. Seeing them as people, which Lorelai often, and it's a running theme, feels like her mother doesn't see her, doesn't know her daughter. And actually that comes up later in the episode too. It is kind of the theme for this episode. Do you know your daughter kind of thing. Yeah. So But Emily, you notice, doesn't have pudding. It's just the Rory and Lorelai and Richard. They all eat the pudding. They all think it's very good. Even Richard says it's really good. It's in crystal bowls, so it's very fancy pudding. But I cannot grok from this scene if Emily really understands that she's made this concession, or if she's feigning that she doesn't understand. What do you think?
I mean, I'm not sure. That it does come up in a later scene, and I feel like in the later scene, Lorelai doesn't explain what she means, and we'll get to it in a little bit. But when they're shopping, Lorelai brings up the pudding, but she doesn't explain why the pudding is important. So,
but they made such a big deal out of it in the dinner scene that I'm surprised that at least Emily doesn't remember it. But what Emily remembers, or what's important to Emily in this scene, is that Rory likes the bowl, the crystal bowl. So she says, "You like the bowl? Put a Post-it on it.
Put a Post-it on it when you're done," which I loved that. That was a great little moment between the two of them. I also thought that something that is happening in this scene is Rory is kind of into the idea of putting the Post-its on things, and Lorelai is not. Lorelai thinks this whole claiming stuff things is ghoulish, but Rory, I don't think Rory is on the same page as Lorelai about it entirely, because when Grandma says put a Post-it note on it, Rory's got a big smile on her face. She wants that bowl.
Yeah, she loves the bowl. And here's the thing about that. Lorelai and Rory are often on the same page on a lot of things, but Rory is way more often on the same page with her grandparents than her mother is with Richard and Emily. Her goal to go to Harvard, and I don't know that she consciously realizes or recognizes that once she goes to Harvard, she is going to be a member of an elite. And that her grandparents are members of this elite, and that her mother is not. So I don't know if she consciously realizes it, but she is definitely comfortable with the whole elite thing, including crystal bowls.
For sure. And, maybe to relate that back to whether or not Emily understands the concession of the pudding, I do think that some of what is happening in this episode is unconscious desires. I think Rory does want to be a part of the elite. I just don't think that she conceptualizes it as that. And I think maybe Emily did want to do something that they would like, but I don't know that she consciously conceptualized it as that.
Yes, and Rory's not being conscious about it. I think there are elements, components of the elite lifestyle that appeal to her. Maybe on a, I don't know, artistic, or what's the word I want?
Aesthetic?
That's exactly the word I was looking for. On an aesthetic level. This is stuff that she has not been around. Her mother grew up with this, and her mother rejected it. But she has not been around this lifestyle that puts value on the beauty of things for the sake of beauty. And these crystal bowls are beautiful. So that appeals to her. And so I don't know if it's just because she's not been exposed to it or what's going on here, but she's definitely growing. She's developing as a young person of 16 or 17 should be doing. So it's a fascinating dynamic going on here, I think.
And I think Rory is drawn to that aesthetic because a lot of academia is draped in that aesthetic. So I don't, at this point, it's not consciously that she wants to be a rich elite person. It's consciously that she wants to be a bookish person. And those two things are associated in her mind and in a lot of culture. I mean, Harvard especially. Harvard is maybe the prime example of this. It's all about that elite aesthetic and the implication that the elite aesthetic is part and parcel with being an academic person with academic excellence.
Well, and, historically, the arts were supported by the elite. Leonardo, Michelangelo, all these people had to have patrons. So the artwork that they did has always been associated with elitism, with wealth. The reason we have a lot of art from the Renaissance, from any previous era, is because wealthy people supported it. So there's an association between wealth and the arts that I think we in modern times strive often to disassociate. We take kids, even in the poorest neighborhoods nowadays, to the art museum. Although there are statistics that show, I forget what the percentage is, but there's a staggeringly high percentage of 5-year-olds coming into kindergarten who have never been to an art museum. So in America, and that's very sad. And we can get into that at another time. But anyway, I didn't mean to go off topic here, but there's definitely I think a realization in this country that we want things to be on a more equal footing. We give lip service to it, even if we don't always put policy to it, but we do talk about it, and so that whole thing, the wealth and artistry. I mean, it costs a lot of money to buy these bowls that she likes.
Oh yeah,
somebody who is making minimum wage isn't going to be able to afford crystal bowls unless they do like I do and buy them in thrift stores, which is that's my lifestyle.
Same. Yeah, I think I've literally got a crystal bowl right now sitting on my dresser that I bought at either thrift store or garage sale, one or the other.
And you love it, right? They're beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean, I love having beautiful things around me, but I can't afford to buy them brand new. So yeah.
Oh yeah,
lots of stuff going on in this scene, isn't there? Gilmore Girls are great. I just gotta throw in here that we have all these tangents that we go off on because they bring, and maybe that's why I like the show so much, is that contrast between the three levels, really. The parents are at this one level, Rory's kind of at the in-between level, and then Lorelai, who is not at all stupid or poor, not poorly educated, not poor, but she represents that contrast to her parents' wealth. And
I mean, I think the contrast is between like upper class and middle class, right?
Yeah.
Like I think like the show hints that Lorelai at one point was dealing with poverty and actual like working class issues, but in reality, her job, her house, these are like middle even
class.
upper middle class things. Yeah. And as we can get into when it comes time for it, Lorelai's gift to Rory is an expensive gift.
I want to talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
You can't really see it very well, and I have a guess about what it is because of the color. So we'll talk about it when we get there. But yeah, she gives her the most expensive gift she gets.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's so that's the scene at the grandparents' house. I'll move it along because I do have a little nerd tangent that I want to go on for the next scene. So the next scene is Suki and Lorelai at work. I think they are planning the menu for Rory's party, and Suki says it's too bad that Emily wouldn't give up Friday night. To which Lorelai responds, "No, she has her Vulcan Death Grip on that one." And that line kind of bothered me because I was like, I feel like I have heard it called the Vulcan Death Grip by people who are not actually Star Trek fans.
It's not a death grip.
Yeah, so I looked it up. I've never, I've seen every single Star Trek show, most of them all the way through more than once, and I've never heard it called a Vulcan Death Grip in the show. It is referred to that way once as a trick. So there is no such thing as a Vulcan Death Grip. It is the Vulcan Nerve Pinch or the Vulcan Neck Pinch. But there is an episode of the original series where Spock uses essentially a super strong nerve pinch on Kirk, and he does kind of a theatrical thing where he like pushes into his face while he's doing it, and he calls it a Vulcan Death Grip to trick the Romulans into thinking that Kirk is dead. So there is no such thing as a Vulcan Death Grip. It does not exist.
No.
And so, yeah, so that's just but it gets referred to that way a lot of the time in pop culture, I guess because that term was technically used one time. Also, apparently there was a band called Vulcan Death Grip. But yeah,
really?
Yeah. Jeez. But there is no such thing as a Vulcan Death Grip. There is only the nerve pinch, which does not kill anyone. So anyway, that's my nerd tangent.
Okay.
And then Lorelai asks Suki to guess what surprising thing Emily might have done, and Suki's first guess is wore jeans.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah. The answer is, of course, served pudding.
Well, here's my two things on this one. First of all, I wrote something down that I can't remember the context of, but there's something where she talks about how her mom doesn't cave, and then the quote is, the Pope has plans, but Elvis and Jim Morrison are coming. So,
yes.
and this is, I guess, the description of all the people who are coming to the fancy party at her parents' house. And then when they're in the kitchen scene, there's a lead-in shot to that. A shot of the facade of the inn from a completely different angle. It looks very different. They usually do it from the left. This time it's from the right, and you get to see the sign. And it looks like it's even a different color. I mean, it's like, did you use a different house for this one episode alone? Why do they do this? Anyway, but the kitchen scene, it felt to me, I'm just going to throw this in here, that the repartee, am I saying that right? Between the two women is not up to their usual pizzazz. And I felt that the whole episode was not up to its usual pizzazz. It wasn't as engaging as it usually is. I think it's a very important episode, and we'll talk about that later. But it's still not as dynamic as the show usually is.
I do think it's not as funny as it usually is, but I also think that there's a lot of layered emotional stuff that's happening.
Yes, it's a very important episode, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then Emily calls Lorelai on the phone and says that she wants to go shopping for a present for Rory because she wants to get Rory something that she'll actually like. And Lorelai quips, "Okay, you can get her the bong then." But it's ultimately a good conversation for them. And they
very
agree,
good.
Yeah, they agree to go shopping together.
Hugely important. And she actually says to her, "Let me into your club and advise me on getting her a gift. Let me into your club." This is such an important turning point for Emily. She realizes she's a Gilmore girl. And she wants to be part of the Lorelai and Rory club. I think it's another concession. It's like the pudding. Yeah. She really wants to be, and she ends up buying her a gift that costs hardly anything. Yep. But it's something that she learns how to give a gift in this episode, because gifts are about the person you're giving to, not about yourself.
Yep, exactly. And
she picks out something with her daughter's help that her granddaughter will like, even though it's cheap, and she would rather get her the $500 crystal bowl or whatever it was they were. No, she's looking at pearls.
They go through a couple of things when we cut to the actual shopping scene. The first thing that we see Emily want to buy Rory is this hat, which Lorelai correctly points out looks like it belongs on the Queen of England. It's like a very stodgy hat.
It's adorable, and it would be great for Halloween. It would be
great for Halloween. Or if you were going to like a society event, but it's not great for everyday wear. Lorelai tries to redirect her towards this adorable hot pink guitar-shaped purse, which Emily is kind of affronted by, and then she goes for the pearls and a cashmere sweater set.
Yeah, she says. Which actually Rory would probably like. Because she is a little bit more preppy than her mom is.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like Rory actually probably would have liked those. Also, to be honest, like, I personally was never super into pearls, but I knew a lot of girls in high school who would have loved a string of real pearls.
Yeah. Same here. I mean, I've never had a string of real pearls, and I would love it. And I mean, I have a lot of fake pearls in my fake jewelry, and I wear it all the time. I love the look of pearls, but I usually like it with something funky. So jeans. I would wear pearls with jeans. So, but yeah, I would love it. There you go. Hint, hint. Christmas gift. I would love a set of pearls.
Okay.
You heard it, people. You heard me tell her what I want for Christmas. Anyway, but the pearls, I think Rory would have liked that. And actually, when she's with the guitar purse, I thought, oh my God, she would like that, and she would like the pearls. Yes. So get them both.
Get them both, yeah. I would like that hot pink guitar-shaped purse.
See, I would not. I think it was just a little too much for me, a little too obnoxious. But I'm not a 16-year-old girl, so.
And I am. So there's another reference in this scene that
By the way, you are older now than Lorelai is in this. Yeah, I just want to point that out.
I'm well aware. I know that my sense of fashion skews way younger than I actually am.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant that it occurred to me that we are doing this so much later. I mean, 20 years later than from after the show was on, that you are actually now, even though when we watched it, you were Rory's age, you are now Lorelai's age.
Yes, I am now older than Lorelai. But Lorelai chides Emily by saying, you're not shopping for Rory, you're shopping for your imaginary granddaughter, Barbara Hutton. So I looked up Barbara Hutton.
I was going to say, do you know who that is? Okay, go ahead.
This is the intro Wikipedia description. Barbara Woolworth Hutton was an American debutante, socialite, heiress, and philanthropist. She was dubbed the poor little rich girl.
Yep.
First when she was given a lavish and expensive debutante ball in 1930 amid the Great Depression, and later due to a notoriously troubled private life.
She is kind of infamous for being the poster child for poor little rich children. She's better known for that than she is for anything. I mean, that's what Barbara Hutton is yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Woolworth heir.
In part because we, so far Rory has been a very, mild-mannered kind of person, but I can kind of see us heading into a direction where the poor little rich girl thing isn't a totally inaccurate thing for her.
Yeah.
I do think overall the show really wants to tell us that Rory and Lorelai have a tough time with finances, but in reality they're way better off than most people.
Yeah.
And so there is a little hint of like, well, let's feel bad for these people who are in fact upper middle class and have a lot of wealth, if not directly at their disposal, then for the price of a weekly dinner, they have these grandparents who are paying for an extremely expensive education, which, is not to say that I don't like these characters. I do. I like the characters. I like the show. But I feel like a couple of times in this episode, I was really struck by the disconnect between how poor we're supposed to think they are and how poor they actually are.
Yeah. It's definitely a show about money. I mean, money is almost a fifth character in this show, and how it's used, what it buys, how it separates people. It's definitely in there, and can never get away from it because her parents are wealthy and they are paying for Lorelai's child's education. And they do mention in this episode that it's a loan. This is the second time that they've, after the first episode where she insists that this is going to be a loan, she'll pay them back.
Yes. This
is the first time, and we're at the 6th or 7th episode, and this is the first time we hear them talking about it as a loan. But I get the impression throughout the series that it's not a loan. She's never going to pay this back.
Yeah, also, I'm sorry, where do we think all their wealth is gonna go when they do die? We were literally just talking about their will. These do not seem like the kind of people who are going to give all of their stuff away to charity when they die. It's going to Lorelai and Rory. It's the wealth is gonna go there eventually. And
the important part of what you just said is that it's going to Lorelai. I mean, It will go to Rory, but probably by the time Richard and Emily die, Rory may not need it. Lorelai may not either. My impression has been most wealthy people give or leave, I should say, the majority of their estate to their children, not their grandchildren. Now, they might give money to their grandchildren, but the majority of the estate is, and they only have one child, it's going to Lorelai. So she's going to be a wealthy woman someday. And Rory will get some of that, but I think that these are traditional wealthy people. It's going to Lorelai.
Yeah. So just to wrap up that scene, they do end up on the bracelets, which, did those bracelets look familiar to you? Because they looked familiar to me.
Go ahead then. I have no idea what they were, but they looked funky and cheap to me.
I think I bought you bracelets like that. I think I bought you a slightly nicer version, but they're these bracelets that have very round balls all around them. Mm-hmm. The ones that they got apparently light up, which I'm pretty sure the ones that I bought you did not light up. I think I bought you a bracelet like that was a rose quartz pink, but it's just little balls all the way around it. Anyway, it just struck me as I remember those bracelets being everywhere at that time. Those little
so you bought this for me when you were in grade school.
Oh yeah, this was a middle school, high school.
Okay.
I think
I kind of remember that. Yeah.
Okay. Like a Mother's Day or a birthday present when I was 15 or something. Mm-hmm. I vaguely remember. It probably broke a year later, but
could
this
very well
bracelet. I just remember that style of bracelet being everywhere, and I think there was a range because I think I got you kind of a nicer one, but you could get some that were like just straight up obviously plastic. Apparently these ones lit up. Those kinds of bracelets were everywhere. So it's a very sign of the times kind of jewelry. So before we move on to the actual next scene, the phone call and the shopping scene, in the middle of that is a scene with Rory at school, which my note on that is Tristan assaults Rory with his presence because he just pops up out of nowhere. It's very clear she does not want to talk to him. And he informs her that her entire Chilton class has been invited to this party on Friday. And right after that, she walks by some girls talking about how they're being forced to go.
Yeah.
And she just looks absolutely miserable, and I feel for her in that scene.
Yeah.
That is the height of embarrassing, to be 16, 17, however old Rory is, and to be in the position of people you already didn't like feeling like they are being forced to go to your birthday party. It's kind of the definition of pathetic.
And it's an elitist pathetic, because it's a class thing. Because, you know, when you go to a prep school and you're part of a class, you're expected to go. You know, and Rory doesn't want that. But at the same time, and I don't know if we're there yet, but the reason she doesn't do anything about it, she doesn't even tell her mom about it. She doesn't tell her that her grandparents have done this, because it doesn't want to disrupt the change that seems to be happening with Emily. And that is that Emily is trying to connect with them more on their level, and she doesn't want to mess with that. The problem with that is that things build up, and we'll get to that in a minute, but sometimes you need to deal with things when they happen so they don't blow up, and it does blow up later.
And I think, this episode is like the second example of Rory keeping stuff to herself for too long until she kind of explodes. But so this is kind of the very next scene is at the diner again. It actually starts with a cute little interaction between Luke and Lorelai. I would say one of the first, very obviously the show is shipping these two people together scenes.
Yeah, but what does he say to her?
He asks her to marry him in order to get her to shut up.
And it's a very astounding moment. It just comes out of nowhere. I mean, you know why he does it instantly, but at the same time, you're taken aback, and so is Lorelai.
But right after that, she does invite him to Rory's party, and he seems genuinely touched by the invitation. Like, he's kind of like, oh, you don't have to invite me to that. And she's like, no, I want to. And he's like, really? Oh, okay, then I'll go. Which does bring up a question for me, which I guess is I think they're answering through implication instead of stating it. I guess Luke has not actually lived in the town that long, even though his father lived in the town. I think maybe eventually, and I'm not sure if we've talked about that yet. I'm not sure if that's come up in the show yet. But I guess the implication is that maybe Luke grew up there as a little kid and then moved away, and he's only been, as an adult, living in the town the past year or so.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we ever know. And I didn't even remember that his father lived there, but now that you mention it, I kind of do remember that. But my impression is that their relationship is growing. I mean, it's kind of in its very earliest stages, and I wish we knew how long Luke's Diner had been open. But it always feels like it's recent. But we don't know exactly how recent.
Well, and it's kind of weird because it feels like on the one hand, it feels like the diner is super well established and is like a mainstay of town. On the other hand, it always feels like Luke himself is kind of an outsider. And like the conversation that happens next is Rory comes in and she and Lorelai sit down, and then Luke comes over to bring them coffee, which I do just want to note, it is very clearly dark outside. And Rory specifically asks for coffee, so they are drinking coffee after dark. Yeah. Not a surprise with these two, but just pointing it out. Rory and Lorelai are telling him about what great parties Lorelai throws, and they claim that at Rory's 8th birthday party, the cops were called, and they arrested the clown. And Luke does not know this story at all, so at the very least, he was not around when Rory was a kid.
Did they explain why they arrested the clown?
No. He says he would prefer not to know. Yeah.
that opens up a whole can of worms that we're not going to get into, but yeah.
So yeah, unless you have anything else to say about this scene, I want to get to the next scene, which I think is kind of the heart of the episode.
It's it's just lovely.
Yeah, Lorelai comes in to wake Rory up at 4 a.m. on the morning of her birthday. 4:03 a.m.
I mean, it's on the clock. It says on the clock. It says 4:03.
And asks her what she thinks of her life so far. And Rory's only complaint is humidity. She would like humidity to stop. And Lorelai says she'll work on it. And then she tells her the story of her birth. And it's very clear from their back and forth that she has told the story the exact same way every single year. Mm-hmm. And the quote is, "And there I was," and Rory interrupts, "in labor." And Lorelai continues, "And while some have called it the most meaningful experience of your life, to me it was something more akin to doing the splits on a crate of dynamite."
Yep.
And Rory responds, "I wonder if the Waltons ever did this."
And the question that I have about this scene is that, how old is Rory? This is where it first comes up. Because she says, and apparently she's reciting the same thing in exactly the same way as she has done every year. But she says, and blah, 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 so many moons ago, instead of saying 17 years ago. So it seems like it's deliberately, what's the word I want?
Obfuscating?
Yeah, I was thinking obtuse, but that's not the right. Deliberately, she's just, vague. Deliberately vague about how old Rory is, and we never find out. But in the first episode, I'm pretty sure they said she was 16, and she's driving herself to school. So she has to be at least 17 in this scene. Why aren't they saying that? Anyway.
I mean, maybe they wanted her to be 16, but also to turn 16.
Isn't that weird?
You know what? Doesn't she have okay, now that I'm thinking about it, doesn't she have a crown on her head that says how old she is? Maybe it just says happy birthday.
That one I don't know. But but this scene is very lovely, and actually as I was watching it, I remember thinking, why did I never do that with Sarah?
You did! You did!
At 6:58 p.m. I would come in and tell you? Okay.
You would do it at midnight. You would come in at midnight.
Oh, okay.
You came in at midnight. I mean, not every year, but you came in at midnight to wish me a happy birthday. You didn't tell me, I don't think you told me the story of my birth specifically, but you would just come in and tell me that it was my birthday.
Because you were still awake at midnight doing homework.
Yes.
I just want to say.
And that it was the day that you became a mom.
Yeah, and I actually have always celebrated your birthday as my mom anniversary, too.
Yes.
And because it is. And it was a very important turning point in my life, so I see it as both. But I don't think I ever actually came to you on your birthday at 7:58 p.m. and said, "Hey, you were born at this moment so many years ago."
So then there's another short little scene where Rory and Lane go to Luke's diner. They try to sit at the counter, and he tells them wrong table, and then explains that he baked her a coffee cake and blew up balloons for her and left them at a specific table, which is super sweet.
And here's my comment on that. They sit there, and the camera goes back and forth between them. You never see Lane's cake, but you see Rory's cake, which keeps getting smaller, and she keeps forking it, but you never see her put the fork to her mouth or chew. This is my complaint about this show, is that there's always food in it. They talk about the food, and we've talked about this before, and we'll probably talk about it again, but you never actually see them eating food. They eat, the actual act of eating or chewing never happens on screen.
Yeah, that's true. Also, another, similar kind of annoyance, Dean walks in and orders a cup of coffee and does not pay for it and leaves.
That is weird. But also, they exchange knowing glances at each other.
Yes.
Lane's back is to him, so she doesn't see him. So at this point, Lane still does not know about the boy. So when is that going to change? That's
not sure. But yeah, Dean at the door mouths happy birthday to Rory. And Rory gets a little smile on her face, and Lane asks why she's smiling, and Rory responds that she's thinking about pudding. But Rory does tell Lane that she doesn't want to go to her grandmother's party because all of the Chilton kids have been invited.
Yeah.
So she is at least venting to Lane. Although even in that scene, she like reconvinces herself not to complain about it because she wants her mom and Emily to continue getting along.
Yeah, which is Rory taking on too much again for other people's emotional connections and needs, and she needs to stop doing that, but she hasn't come to that realization yet. You can't fix everything.
So we pretty much go straight to, I guess, the lead up to the party. We cut to Emily.
The first party.
Essentially,
the first party, the
yes.
one at the grandparents' house.
The grandparents' party, yes. We cut to Emily screaming at the hired help and being very specific. I think there's a specific line about how the candles need to be exactly 6 inches apart.
Yes.
Yes.
Get a ruler.
She also, Richard comes in and she orders him not to talk business, and he claims that he'll only do it for a minute, and she's like, no, you'll do it all night. Even if I dropped dead, you'd keep doing it. You'd walk over my corpse. And then he kind of interrupts her to say that she looks really nice. But also, she's right. He literally spends the whole party talking about business.
He does, yeah. But and here's two things about this scene. She is surprised at him saying how nice she looks. So apparently this is not something he does very often, but it seems it's a clicking moment between them, like it's a flirtatious moment, I guess. Mm-hmm. And you don't see that with them very often. But she says to him, and this was my thought, she says to him, Richard, no business. This is your granddaughter's party. And my thought was, seriously? You just yelled at one of the dozens of workers that the candlesticks need to be 6 inches apart, but he can't talk business? I mean,
yeah.
It's just a very strange dynamic that I will never understand, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about Emily in this whole episode, to say the least. I will say I think Kelly Bishop is doing an incredible job.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Portraying this character. You can totally see, like, without Kelly Bishop's, like, layered vulnerability, I think Emily would be a lot harder to like in this episode.
Yes. Well, and throughout the whole show. You know, I think we always like Emily, even though she is she is a difficult person.
She's tough.
She is a very difficult person, but the actress, and I'm glad you brought this up because Kelly Bishop really is a brilliant actress. I can't remember where, but somewhere in the last 3 or 4 months I've seen her in something else. She's 20 years older now, and she's probably in her 50s at this point, the actress. So she's in her 70s now at the time of the show, and I've seen her something recently, and I didn't even recognize who it was. It was like she looked familiar, so I stopped whatever it was I was watching and looked it up on IMDb, and it was Kelly Bishop, and I thought, wow, she is an incredible actress. It's kind of disappointing that she never got more roles because she's really, really good.
I know I think she was also in Dirty Dancing
prior
to this show. Yeah, I haven't actually seen Dirty Dancing. I've just seen like a clip where she is clearly in it. Yeah, it is kind of a bummer that she doesn't have more like leading roles because she's incredible, but also it's not that surprising. We don't have very many roles for any actors, for any female actors over 40. So.
Yeah, she was probably very lucky to get this role, and probably felt that way about it too. So and it's a great role. I mean, it's good writing, so it's a great role, and she's a good actress, and so she probably loved it. Yeah. This party scene, though, a couple things about it. I think the dresses are great. The 2 dresses. I mean, you don't get to see what the dresses look like before she alters them. So Emily has bought both Gilmore Girls a dress for the party, and apparently there's a lot of tulle in it because that's the only thing that we see when Lorelai is playing with the dress. I don't know what she does to it, but when they get to the party, that apparently the dresses look very different, but they're very lovely. So, I don't know what they look like before, but she does a good job with that. And then there's a scene where Rory is talking to Mitzi. No, Lorelai is talking to Mitzi. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I guess Mitzi was a high school friend or somebody who knew her. And
friend in heavy quotation marks.
Yeah. Somebody she went to high school with. Okay.
Yes.
And she keeps talking about stuff, and she says, she's divorced. I want to grow. She says, I want to grow. And then she shoves her glass at a waiter for a refill. So, really?
Yeah, she approaches Lorelai, and she says, I haven't seen you since your third trimester or something.
Yeah.
And Lorelai responds with, I was going to say since high school. And then Mitzi's like, oh, did I say something rude? I'm trying not to be rude. I'm trying to grow. And then proceeds to be horrifically rude for her and the entire rest of her time on screen.
Yeah.
Her like, the thing that finally breaks Lorelai's back in the conversation is she sees Rory and says, oh, you can really see Christopher in her, can't you? Does that kill you? And Lorelai's like, I'm done. I'm done with this conversation.
Yeah.
Mitzi is a piece of work. Jumping back just a little bit, Emily asks Lorelai what she thinks of the decorations, and Lorelai's response is, I think Edith Wharton would have been proud and busy taking notes. I'm not like the biggest scholar of Edith Wharton, but I have mixed feelings about that as a reference. Edith Wharton
I don't
was
think it's
a
an
member.
appropriate reference at all. I mean,
I kind of don't.
I mean, Edith Wharton, I'm trying to remember, is she the one that wrote all the books about the West? Am I thinking,
No.
did I get the right writer, or is she,
You're thinking of someone else whose name has left my mind. Edith Wharton was a rich woman, and she did write about the wealthy,
Society.
the wealthy upper
she wrote
classes.
society novels, yes,
okay. She wrote, The House of Mirth is the one that I've read.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
also
okay.
The Age
I've
of
read
Innocence. And so she did write about the upper class, but she was pretty critical of the upper class. That was kind of her thing. A lot of her novels are about people who got a little unlucky and then were brought to complete ruin because of the rigid structure of the upper class. And also, Edith Wharton was not famous for, or is not famous for being a hostess. She's famous for being a writer. So it feels a little sexist to have that as the pull. Like, would you have said F. Scott Fitzgerald would have been proud and busy taking notes?
Yeah,
like,
I think that's a very good point. And it also feels like, well, so is that deliberate on the part of the writers? Because Lorelai doesn't have the education that her mother has, or that Rory is going to get. So maybe she has never read Edith Wharton and assumed that was... That could be, I don't know. It's not like the writers to get these kind of things wrong, so I almost wonder if it was deliberate. But what she also says in that same scene is something about, I don't remember how she phrases it, but she says 6 inches apart, right? The candlestick.
Yeah.
So this is a long-standing thing. This candlesticks have to be 6 inches apart on the mantle.
For sure.
And crazy...
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just like, wow, where did you get 6 inches from? Anyway.
So kind of the next thing that happens in the party is really uncomfortable. Emily, like, kind of grabs Rory by the shoulders and tells her that a bunch of her school friends are hanging out in the library. Of course, unbeknownst to Emily, none of them are Rory's friends.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know them. So she kind of forcibly steers Rory into the library and then leaves her there. And Rory stands awkwardly while two boys we've never seen on screen before basically express their disinterest in her and turn away. And then she leaves the room and immediately runs into Paris.
Well, and here's another thing about that scene. It's fall, right? So it's October maybe. So she's only been at Chilton for maybe a month. I mean, we're just guessing here, extrapolating.
A month or two, yeah.
So how would you expect her to know all these kids within a month or two? It seems very insensitive. I mean, you were saying earlier that Emily is, kind of this Jekyll and Hyde character. She's trying to get to know them, but sometimes she's just so insensitive. Why would you invite all these kids that your granddaughter is just beginning to become acquainted with, instead of asking her, which of the students at the school have you gotten to know and I should invite?
I mean, I feel like Emily is treating this party more like an official old world social function than
a society function.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
A coming out party. I'm surprised she didn't actually say, let's make it a coming out party. That's exactly how it feels.
Yes, it feels much more like a society event. I actually, when we get to the other party, one of my notes was like, the second party feels like a party. The first party felt like a work event,
Yeah, it does feel like a work event. And actually, interesting thing, I don't know if you've got an order that you're going through, but at some point, Rory finds your grandfather talking to 2 or 3 men, and he wants to join the conversation because I think because she really enjoyed the golfing outing with her grandfather, and she had met some of his friends there, and so I think she kind of sees this as an opportunity to talk to adult men on an adult level, and she tries to enter the conversation. Before she can, they all hand her a birthday card, which we have to assume each one probably has a lot of money in it, and then they continue talking shop, and then they walk off. And it's like, that's very nice that you brought a birthday card with money, but she really wanted to interact with you, and Richard, he does the same thing. It's not like he introduces her, but he doesn't attempt to draw her into the conversation, and she wants that conversation. That's the reason she shows up. She wants to know about Richard's world. She wants to know about the business world. She wants to know about the bigger world outside Stars Hollow. And these are people who represent that, and they just kind of brush her off and walk away.
I think at this point, Rory is much better suited to the kind of socializing that happens in the adult world than the kind of socializing that is happening at Chilton. I mean, basically, it's heavily implied that the kids at Chilton are biased against her because she didn't go to Chilton the whole time. You know, they do still...
to the grade schools they all went to.
Yeah, exactly.
She's
like, they still see her as a scholarship kid, even though she's not.
And they know that now, because they're at her grandparents' house, so they know she's not a scholarship kid anymore.
And now they all resent being forced to go to this party that they didn't want to go to on their Friday night.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she has a quick run-in with Paris, who tells her that her parents made her come and seems insistent that Rory not believe that she came to this party voluntarily. She's like, otherwise I wouldn't be here. You believe me, don't you?
It's an interesting scene, and I don't know if it's this one or the next one. Oh, I think it's a college fair. There's some foreshadowing going on here because, and I think it's okay to say that later on, Rory and Paris become good friends, best friends even.
Yeah.
I
feel like it's very clear.
Time.
Yeah, but I feel like granted, I've seen the show before, but I feel like in this scene, this felt to me almost like the friend version of like a rom-com scene where like these two are not admitting that they should be friends yet, but they should be friends.
Paris is starting to understand her a little bit better, and I'm not sure that I did notice it in this scene, but I noticed it more in the college fair scene. They are the same height. Actually, Paris is shorter than her, but up until now... every scene that we've seen her in with Paris, it has always felt to me that Paris was taller than she. And which is weird when you think about it, because we know that Rory is tall. She's as tall as her mom, and even Richard commented on a few episodes back that boy, she's tall. So up until now, though, in the scenes with Paris, we have not seen them positioned in such a way that she was taller than Paris, and I think that's a visual equalizing that is starting to happen that's very deliberate on the part of the showrunner, as it were.
Yeah. So all of Paris's stuff in this episode, it's showing a lot more vulnerability from her than we've seen so far. So right after she runs into Paris, and this relates, she then runs into Tristan, who's horrible again. Richard comes over and asks who her friend is, referring to Tristan, and she replies, "I don't know, but this is Tristan." And Tristan like immediately transforms into an equally obnoxious but more like socially acceptable version of himself. I put it in my notes as he puts on his rich white privilege face and drops his last name, Dugray, to Richard, and Richard recognizes the name, and they have like a handshake, and then Rory runs away, and as Rory runs away, we cut to Paris, who is gazing longingly at Tristan. Which already I'm just like, girl, you deserve better than that.
Yes, I did too. I thought the same thing. This guy is not worthy of anybody.
No.
Especially not these two smart, capable young women, strong young women. Yeah. Paris does eventually figure that out, right? I mean, she doesn't.
I don't remember if she figures it out that directly, but we'll get there. It's going to be a continuing thread. This is definitely, I mean, like I said, we're showing some vulnerability in Paris, and one of her vulnerabilities is that she has absolutely tragic taste in men, also has kind of low self-esteem. We're going to get some more background information on Paris, but it is slowly becoming more and more apparent that all of her animosity towards Rory comes from her insecurity.
Yeah,
and
it
that
does.
insecurity is showing its head. Just to like run through some of the plot, Emily, the next thing that happens is Emily tries to pressure Rory into giving a speech, and that is when Rory finally breaks and kind of yells at Emily in front of everyone, and then runs off to hide in Lorelai's room.
Yes, it's a very important scene, and it starts off kind of slow. Her voice just gradually gets louder and louder in the scene until you start to realize it, and then the camera pulls back a little bit, and you can see that the people around them are starting to listen. And so it's a scene that grows as Rory's talking and getting louder and angrier. But this is something that Emily needed to experience if they are going to move forward. She has to understand that Rory's a real person. She's got a personality. She's got a life. She is not somebody that Emily can just rubber stamp and say, this is who you are. And, she didn't. Rory is a good kid. She's trying. She wants her mother and her grandmother to get along better. She didn't complain about the Chilton kids. But in this scene, Emily, even though she tells her that, Emily doesn't give an inch. It's like she will not back down. And you know what, Emily? You're in the wrong here. You are wrong, and Rory is right, and you can't see that. And all she can, and there's two things going on. She's not only feeling like she is completely right, she's also embarrassed because this Rory's getting very loud in front of her friends. So it's a very important scene for everybody.
Yeah. I do feel like it was not the ideal way to handle it on Rory's part, but she's a teenager, so it's not, she's not gonna handle it the ideal way, and she did try. She tried to keep it to herself, but, in this moment, it's not even just that the Chilton kids that she doesn't like are there. It's that she didn't know she was supposed to make a speech. That's not something that you spring on someone in the middle of a party.
Especially a teenager. Teenagers don't make speeches.
Exactly.
What do you want her to say? Thank you, Grandma, for giving me this party. I mean, what was she supposed to say?
That I didn't want.
That I didn't want, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Grandma, for giving me this party and inviting all of the kids who are mean to me every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a tough moment, and I feel for both of them, because I do also kind of feel for Emily in that this is an embarrassing moment. Emily is in the wrong, but her embarrassment is real.
Yeah.
And I do understand that, but it's a reaction to the fact that essentially what Emily is doing is, like, she's gotten some small wins with Rory up until now. The Rory loved the club, so Emily won in that episode, so I think she's allowed herself to be convinced that Rory will basically be the version of Lorelai that Emily always wanted.
Yeah.
And what she's not realizing is that the version of Lorelai that she wanted was a robot, and Rory is not a robot.
Yeah, she really had some gains, you're right, some wins, but this is a clear loss, and she does not take losses very well. No. But it's followed up by a wonderful scene in Lorelai's bedroom. So Rory retreats to Lorelai's bedroom and is laying in her bed, which is frilly, has not, first of all, not been changed since Lorelai moved out 16 years earlier. It's exactly the same. It's frilly and girly, and it's not Lorelai.
There are so many dolls in this
There's
room.
so many dolls.
So many antique dolls.
And it's got a real Victorian feel to it.
Yes.
The whole room has a real Victorian feel to it. So she just flops down on the bed, and she's laying in the bed, looking out, and then Lorelai comes in and flops down next to her. And this is actually one of the scenes that's in the credits. So we're gradually getting through all those scenes that are in the credits. And they have a nice little talk, and it's kind of lovely. And now Emily walks in too, right?
Emily walks in, Emily walks in and interrupts them both to tell them that they're both being very rude by hanging out in this room when there are guests. And Rory, it seems to me like Rory immediately tries to apologize, and Emily basically won't let her.
No.
She cuts her off repeatedly, and is basically, I put it as she's giving her the cold shoulder. She's cold shouldering her, just kind of stonewalling, I guess, is
and
what she's doing.
She hasn't gotten over her mad yet. And this kind of made me think about my mother. Whenever I had fights with her, she and I would calm down at different speeds. And I think with you and I that happened too. And when you have a fight and you don't both calm down and want to make amends at the same time, that's emotionally very difficult. And Emily can be very cold. And she really, you said cold shoulder, yeah, she really is cold to her here. Rory, as soon as she walks away, from the fight, as soon as she's finished yelling at her grandmother and walks away, she knows she's done something really bad and she needs to repair it. She loves her grandmother and she doesn't want to hurt her, and she knows that the party was well intentioned. She feels all the things, and she wants to make amends immediately, but her grandmother is not ready yet. That's just it's a difficult scene to watch.
And there's definitely also, Emily is very old school, old world. She's like colonial old school.
Yes, she is.
Which the very next, kind of a continuation of this scene is they start to say goodbye to their guests, and after the guests leave, Richard comes over to Rory and says, "I know your grandmother has already bought you a gift and signed my name to it. That was part of our agreement when we got married." I wrote that down for that line because it was just that is such an old-fashioned view of marriage. It's kind of more egalitarian, I think, than it normally is, because he's saying that was their agreement, as in they consciously agreed that she would buy all the gifts and sign his name to it. I feel like the more usual thing is it is just assumed that the woman will do that kind of work.
Household management.
Household management, hospitality, anything more social, that the woman will be in charge of that.
And that's actually a common problem with modern women who have careers, and they talk about how that's the third job that men push off on professional women when they get married and expect them to do all of those things. And it's like having a part-time or second full-time job. When you have to arrange everything, you have to buy the gifts, you have to get the kids to the birthday parties, all that stuff.
I think there's actually a book called The Second Shift.
Yeah, it's a second shift. Yeah. So, but in their marriage, she has not worked, so she has taken on that role. And of course, he says, "That's all good and fine, but here's my gift to you." And
here's my extra gift.
Here's my extra gift. What's interesting to me about that is he hands her a card with money in it, and it's like he is saying, "I know you have a relationship with your grandmother, but we have a relationship too, and I'm honoring that with my own gift to you, which I don't usually do."
Yeah.
So he has really bonded, I think, with his granddaughter, and that's really good to see.
Yeah, and it's a nice moment because Richard has been kind of on autopilot for this whole episode.
Yes.
Exactly. Like I said, Emily was right. He spent the whole time talking business, and this is sort of a reminder that they have this bond, and a moment where he has returned to that bond.
And they reference their earlier conversation about Fez, which you and I were talking about yesterday, and about possibly taking a trip together at some point and where we would like to go. And I said, "Fez, let's go to Fez." Yes. And then I said, "Where the hell's Fez?" So I had to look it up. And it's Fez, F-E-S, not F-E-Z. It's not the hat. But, and it's in Morocco, which is a place I would actually really like to visit. So she's right. Morocco is a fascinating place, fascinating culture. A lot of drugs and things come out of there.
Oh, yeah.
And
design.
So what's the word for that? Not tact. Anyway, a lot of rugs come out of there.
There's also like tiles and stuff, like Moroccan tiles.
Yes. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that comes out of there. And it's got a real specific...
textiles.
That's what I was looking for, textiles.
There we go.
It's very specific culture, trade culture that comes from Morocco that I think is just beautiful and fascinating. Anyway, so they both want to go to Fez, and so he gives her an envelope of money that she can put towards savings for Fez.
Which, you are correct. It is spelled F-E-S, but just as like a humorous note, I watched the show with Netflix's captions on, and Netflix thinks it's spelled F-E-Z.
That's why it was pronounced. I was visualizing it with a Z until I looked it up. Yeah, that's probably why.
So Rory tries to invite Emily to the party on Saturday, which is going to be with the town, but Emily is still kind of shutting her down, still cold shouldering. So Lorelai asks to go speak to her alone, and their conversation is pretty intense. So Lorelai tries to invite her again to the party, and Emily's response is, "I've already been to a party for my granddaughter, and she humiliated me in front of all of my friends. I have no desire to relive that experience, which, you know, is fair, but also Lorelai's response is very accurate. She says, you're doing the same thing to her that you always did to me. You try to control her, and when that doesn't work out, you shut her out, which is very, very accurate. And then, their kind of their final exchange there is Lorelai gets frustrated because Emily is not giving an inch, and she finally says, fine, I give up. And Emily says, oh, you're giving up? If I had $1 for every time you gave up. And Lorelai cuts her off and goes, then you could pay for this party, couldn't you? Which, yeah, so that was just...
It's a hard scene.
It was an intense scene. It's a hard scene, but it is a very emotionally honest scene. Yeah. I think Emily really needed to hear that. Also, I just want to note that I feel so bad for the staff who are in the background of this scene. This is my definition of a nightmare work environment.
Yeah, and see, you keep calling them staff, and I call them workers because they are clearly... Yeah. You know, she's hired a catering company to do all this for her.
I'm thinking of them as staff of the catering company.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It is a hard scene to watch, and it every once in a while, not in every episode, but in quite a few of the episodes so far, there has been a scene between these two women that calls up their history and the hurts that they have both experienced. Lorelai's not completely blameless here. She has left. She did run away. So yeah, they are both working through a lifetime, Lorelai's lifetime of pain and hurts. So that's in the scene. But you kind of get the feeling that we're still at a turning point for them, and that maybe, just maybe, Emily and Richard will show up at the party. But before we get to that, we have to go through the college fair.
Yes. Yeah. So Rory is going to the college fair to pick up another Harvard brochure and to see if they've changed the pictures.
She goes every year.
Yes. And of course, she goes straight to the Harvard booth and she runs into Paris. My note on this scene is they are friend soulmates. They are meant to be friends.
Yep.
But they are still in denial about it. They are both pretty horrified to see the other person there.
Well, and why? It's like you both go to Chilton. Of course you're both going to apply to Harvard.
Also,
you can't go there. I'm going to go there.
Yeah, like I like this scene because I like how it shows what Rory and Paris have in common, but I do just want to say, as I was watching this scene, I was like, I kind of hate how this show and how these characters treat college. I think a lot of TV shows really don't know how to treat college applications, and that's kind of too bad because for some of us, and I am talking about myself, for some of us when we were growing up, we didn't have an extensive back family that went to college, so a good chunk of our understanding of how college works and what you should look for in a college came from television shows, and they are all wildly bad at portraying that, this show included. I think both Rory's reasoning for wanting to go to Harvard specifically and Paris's reasoning both are terrible. Rory's stated reason is literally just, I've only ever wanted to go to Harvard, as if like the reason is she never heard of another school. And then Paris's stated reason is all of the what is her last name? Gellers. All of the Gellers have gone to Harvard. So Paris's reason is my whole family went there, so I have to go there. Rory's reason is I picked it out when I was an infant, so I have to go there.
I don't think Rory actually has a good reason to go to Harvard. She can never articulate it, and you're right. You growing up, and me too. I mean, I grew up in a family where nobody had gone to college, and most people had not even finished high school. So I was the first generation. You were second generation, but what that meant was that it was your parents and your parents' friends, and that was it. And there was nobody else in our family anywhere. Extended out pretty far. I mean, you have a cousin. You have one cousin on your father's side who went to college, and I have a couple of cousins who are younger than me who eventually went to college. One is actually a teacher, and I think she's even like an assistant principal. She's an administrator. So but that's the only one. And I have friends whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents went to college, and it's just mind-boggling to me. Really?
Yeah.
You have college educations going that far back? My grandmother went to 8th grade twice. She went a second year so she could stay in school because there were no grade schools close enough to her. And after that, she was done. And my mother dropped out at 16. My father dropped out. Now, on your father's side, he has distant relatives that he's never met that are pretty highly educated. So there is some relative education there, but you've never met them. So
I have mixed feelings about this scene. We can talk about it as the show goes on because college is going to continue to be a theme. Yeah. But I do feel like there is a lot of romanticization of quote-unquote elite universities, particularly Harvard, Yale, Princeton, like that level. And, the truth of the matter is that most people are never going to get into Harvard. And I want to be clear that it's not because they don't deserve to go there. I think we're starting as a culture to reckon with this a little bit more. But the truth is that a place like Harvard, it does matter a lot how much money your family has. You are much more likely to get in if you are a legacy, and I do believe they will touch on that eventually when we get to the college application stage, but I feel like scenes like this help to reinforce this kind of mystical thinking, magical thinking narrative that if you just work really hard, you'll be able to get into the biggest name universities and it'll all be worth it. And that's just not true. Both Paris and Rory have a lot of advantages that most people do not have. Mm-hmm. So they do have a much higher chance of getting into Harvard. But the fact that they have a much higher chance than most people of getting into Harvard is not actually a reflection of their hard work or whether or not they deserve it. It is a reflection of their privilege.
It's not getting an elite college education is not necessarily a better education.
Exactly.
You went to an elite college and you felt at the end of it that you could have gone to a number of different schools and gotten just as good of an education. And the interesting thing about this is one of my college professors, I saw Rita Madsen. We're going to get a Rita Madsenism here. Huge influence on my life. And I went to Webster University. She was a professor of English there. And her only son, went to the same university you went to. And when I saw her once, years after graduation, and we were talking about it, she said, I guess she must have heard something in my voice, because I said you were a student. We won't get into what school it is, but I were a student at this school. And she said, Beth, I just want you to know that you got a good education at Webster. The English department there, and she was pointing her finger at me, which is why I'm pointing mine at you, because she was the head of the English department. So, of course, she's going to feel this way, but she said the English department there, it was just as good as the English department at the school where you went to that I won't mention.
At my school.
And she knew this because her son had gone there and he had the same, and she'd seen the curriculum and she, I don't know how she knew, but she knew. And that's a really important point to make. Every school has, every good university has good teachers. You don't get to be a teacher at a university and not being smart, not being a good teacher. It's a hard thing to do. A friend of mine, her son-in-law is working on getting tenure at, I want to say Cornell University, and he's on sabbatical this year, and we were talking about it, and she was like, yeah, it's a really cushy job. And I said, yeah, but you know what? It took a lot to get there, and he has to publish. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on when you get tenure, when you get sabbaticals. So all of these people who get to that point where they are teaching young minds, they've put a lot of time into their education. And even at a public university, University of Missouri, these are good schools, and probably many of them have teachers who are just as good as the teachers at Harvard, is my whole point about this. But Harvard has a reputation. So when you go to Harvard, you are paying for that reputation and for the contacts you get. And that's what the Geller name, that's what Paris is referencing. It's for her, it's all about the contacts she will make because of her last name.
We don't really have time to go into all of the issues with upper education in the United States, but that's
But we will probably
some of them.
We'll probably have more comments on it. Anyway, we got to get to the party.
Yes, the fun party finally happens, and we know it's a fun party because Miss Patty is there.
And the whole town is there because, again, the entire town comes to everything. That's their real family. Or that's their other family.
Including Michelle. There is a single shot of Michelle looking miserable in a corner on the phone.
I missed that. I'm glad you said that because I completely missed him.
just a single shot, and Suki made a cake with Rory's face on it, and then we get Lorelai getting Rory the extremely expensive computer.
It's a Mac, right?
It's a Mac. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a Mac.
It says something else. It doesn't say.
It says iBook.
Does it? Which is not a thing.
Yeah, or I think it was a thing, but it was a different thing. It's essentially an iMac, I think.
Yeah, it's blue. I mean, it's got that teal blue color that and this is 2000, right?
Yeah.
So it's a huge monitor is what we're seeing.
Let me just make sure that it wasn't.
I don't think iBook was a thing ever. And in fact, I don't think...
okay, it was.
Was it? Okay.
It was a line of laptops. Sorry, when you look up iBook, the first thing that comes up is Apple Books, which is a different thing. But there was such a thing as an iBook, and it was a line of laptops. The picture on the Wikipedia page doesn't... Oh, okay, if you scroll down, there's another picture that looks a lot more like what Rory got. Oh, hey, I've got a price here. Its introductory price at the time was $1,599. Today, that would be closer to $2,600. Sorry.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
$2,600.
It was an expensive laptop. I mean, they've come down a lot in price, but my MacBook was $1,000. So, and this is 20 years later. So, yeah.
Which, like, you know, I mean, I will say this was at a time when we're right before the time when having a laptop is going to be a standard thing for most,
college, or for anybody,
for most students is what I would say. Which, and I say standard, which I don't mean to imply that it's an easy thing to have.
No.
It's not. It's still expensive. The fact of the matter is that we live in a world where it's increasingly expensive just to get by.
Well, and actually, when you went away to college, and we've talked about this before, I was unemployed. You had to spend your own money that summer to buy yourself a new computer. I mean, your dad may have helped a little bit too, right?
Actually, that was it was mostly Dad.
Okay.
That was his big combo graduation / 18th birthday present to me. A couple years later, when that laptop died, I had to get my own. But the first laptop that I got was right before I left for college, and it was basically the biggest present that my dad ever got me.
Anybody had ever gotten you.
yeah, exactly. It was
the car.
Huge. Well, okay,
I got you a car.
Yes, my mom got me a car after I graduated college, and that is the biggest present that anyone's ever gotten me. But at the time that I got that laptop, it was a huge deal, and not just for me, deal. You know, not just for those of us who did not have a lot of money. That was kind of, I'm a millennial, and I lived through that turning point from when almost no one had computers to each family would have like one shared computer to the current day where most people who are able to make a living in modern society have their own laptop. There was one period where my partner and I literally had, I think 6 computers in the house, because we each had one for our work and one for our personal use, and I had not thrown away a computer that did not work anymore, and I think he also had a computer like that. Yeah. So, but we are at the very beginning of that. So at that time, that would have been a crazy frickin' present. Yeah. So
it's not her senior year. She's a junior.
Yeah.
So if it had happened, and it's not even the spring of her senior year, right before college. This is almost 2 years out, and computers last maybe 4 years, 5 years, laptops. Yeah. So this is one that's going to have to be replaced midway through college. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. But so she opens that up, and the big thing about the party, I think, also is that Emily and Richard come. They attend.
Yes, right after they open this present, someone knocks on the door, and Lorelai doesn't know who it is, so she yells out, "Who's knocking at the door? Get your butts in here," or possibly "Get your asses in here." I'm not sure which one she says. And then
nobody
Emily
knocks.
And Richard,
nobody knocks.
Yeah, exactly. And then Emily and Richard walk in with absolutely stoic, solemn expressions on their face, and you can kind of see, if you're watching it on Netflix, you can see the fingerprints of television that cuts to commercials, because there's just this awkward moment where they're standing silently in the doorway
in the doorway,
stares at them.
Well, And it occurred to me at that moment, but then I forgot about it until it actually came up later on, that this might be the actually the first time that they have come to her house. They've never seen her home.
They say that.
They say it later on, but it occurred to me in that moment. I wonder if this is the first time they also heard her comment. It also made me think, does nobody knock? Everybody just kind of walks in, but not Emily and Richard. They have to knock. So they come in, and the two things that Emily comments on, well, first of all, she kind of acts like all was forgiven. But the two things she comments on, one is on the food. And she's absolutely right. Suki is presented in the whole show as a top-notch chef, and Emily recognizes that immediately when she tries the food. And then the way Luke looks at Lorelai, she sees it immediately.
Yeah. So first of all, Miss Patty comes over and immediately hits on Richard,
and introduces herself as Patricia.
And then Suki tells Lorelai that they have run out of ice, and so Lorelai is on her way to leave the house to go get ice, and then Luke walks in carrying 2 giant bags of ice, and Lorelai runs over to hug him because he has not actually read her mind, but knows that parties tend to run out of ice, so he's shown up with ice.
Yeah.
And Emily oversees this moment, and you can see on her face, and she says to Lorelai later that she sees what the audience sees between the two of them, that the two of them are still in denial about, which is that they are interested in each other.
Well, I don't think Luke is in denial about it. I think it's obvious in his face, and that's what she sees, but Lorelai is like, he's just another man ogling me because I'm cute. And I think that's really her attitude at this point.
I mean, to be a little bit more generous, maybe she just thinks of him as like a guy who does a lot of nice things for her because he's secretly just a very nice guy.
Yeah, could be.
And then we get a little scene of Richard hanging out on the porch where Rory brings him a magazine to entertain him and tells him that there's a test in there that will tell him if he's an autumn or a summer, I think.
And he actually reads the whole magazine. It's hilarious. So
he's into it. He's into it. It's something to read. Yeah, and then Lorelai spies Emily sneaking upstairs and follows her upstairs. And that's kind of when we get the last big scene of the episode, which is where Emily tells her that Luke looked at her like you were about to give him a lap dance, is the line. And Lorelai kind of laughs it off, but when she laughs it off, Emily's like, you're pleased that he looked at you like a porterhouse steak. I think Emily is totally right, but Lorelai does not. And then Emily picks up a picture of Lorelai in a cast, and Lorelai tells her, yeah, that's from when I broke my leg 3 years ago. Emily had no idea that she had broken her leg.
This is a very sad scene to me.
Yes.
But go ahead and explain it, and then I'll comment.
I mean, this is literally, this is where I put my note. Kelly Bishop is so good in this episode. There's this kind of contrast between she's saying these pithy lines, but on her face it's all vulnerability and a little bit of not exactly hurt, but just the realization, as she will say to Richard in a moment, that she does not know her daughter at all.
No. She has missed out on so much, and it's way past the time when she should have seen how her daughter lives. Why is it 16 years before she comes to her home? She's missed out on a lot, and not only has she missed out on a lot, but their relationship has become so separate, so divided, that her daughter didn't even tell her that she'd broken her leg. That's a pretty big deal. And Emily is sad when she realizes that. I cannot imagine you breaking your leg and not telling me for 3 years. I can't imagine doing to my daughter what she did to hers. She rejected her. I mean, this is on Emily. And I think she realizes this, that by pushing her daughter away, she has missed a significant portion of her daughter's life, including a lot of really important events. She wasn't there for Rory's birth. My mother was in the room when you were born. And that's a really wonderful and loving memory for me that Emily doesn't have. It's never
and she will never have. She cannot go back.
No. And this is a very sad scene for me. It's a realization, but it's a very important scene because this is it's kind of a turning point for her. And the whole episode has been a turning point because she wants to, at least I think she's going to start trying to be more pudding-like. She's going to make more pudding. She's going to try to reach out to them a little bit more. But then there's another scene that kind of turns this around because Lorelai is kind of in the same situation. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so just to go through the events as they happen, Richard gives Rory even more money when they leave, and then in the car is when Emily says she's right, I don't know my daughter at all, and Richard doesn't seem to know what to say, but after a moment, Emily says, the traffic, we've got to get going. So you can see that she's grappling with it, but she's still soldiering on. We got to get home. And then we get really quick but kind of gross recipe from Suki. And Lorelai is complaining about having hosted the party and, clean up and all that, and says, now we're gonna have to eat onion dip for a week. And Suki immediately is like, well, if you mix the onion dip with ground turkey and garlic, it isn't that bad. And Lorelai's response is, hey, I'm not looking for a recipe. But I played it back and I was like, is that even a recipe? Is that just a new version of the dip? I don't understand this recipe. You're just supposed to eat onion dip mixed with ground turkey. Okay, that sounds gross to me, but all right.
It does sound gross, yeah.
And that's happening while Lorelai is doing some dishes, and just beyond the kitchen window, Rory and Dean are meeting up in secret for him to give her birthday present, which is a little bracelet that he sort of made for her. He found a
medallion.
Pendant and
a medallion. Yeah.
And put it on a little leather strap. And he gives it to her, and then they hold hands, and Lorelai sees this moment, which is very chaste but is very clearly romantic. And you can kind of see we end on her looking surprised. She had no idea that Dean was enough of a figure in Rory's life that she would meet up with him. And clearly Rory is keeping it a secret. As we said before, she's not even telling Lane.
She is keeping it a secret, and it occurred to me that I wrote down that there are things that Lorelai does not know about her daughter. And it's not like she's being super secretive, but Rory has her own life. And I think in that moment, Lorelai realizes again, and she's realized this before, and we've seen her go through this before, but they're constant reminders that Rory's growing up, she has her own life, and she's going to continue to have her own life going forward, and there will be things in that life that she doesn't tell Lorelai about, not because she's going to be secretive, just because there's just so much in a life that you don't tell people. I had spinach for lunch today. Those are not the things. Those are the things that a child tells her mother, not a young woman. So, because it's just not enough time in a day to tell your mother everything that's happened.
And I think it's also because that is kind of a part of growing up. A part of becoming a teenager is figuring out how to define yourself in a way that is separate from your parents.
Your own identity.
When you're a child, exactly, yeah. When you're a child, you kind of just absorb what your parents teach you, and being a teenager, being an adolescent, is that process of figuring out what things you want to keep from that and what things you don't. Sometimes part of that process involves trying something completely different that your parents don't like at all, and sometimes it involves keeping things a secret that you might not have previously kept a secret. And I think in this case, my feeling is that Rory just doesn't really know how to feel about it yet, and so she isn't ready to tell anyone
private.
Because she's kind of keeping it to herself until she understands it better.
And what they're going through here, what Lorelai, the whole range of emotions that's on her face when she looks out the window, and all of these thoughts probably, I think we're supposed to think all these thoughts occur to her. That is normal and healthy, and it's what most healthy mother-daughter relationships, it's how they progress. But what she had with her own mother was not normal and healthy.
Yeah.
And their separation, into different identities, was more traumatic and happened because she'd had a baby and she was rejected. It's a very different experience. This is normal and healthy. What Emily did to Lorelai was not, and they have to heal that. And over the course of the 7 years of the show, they make great strides in healing that. But there has to be some relief for Lorelai Lorelai at this point to know that what she and her daughter have is so much better, so much more loving, so much healthier, and that going forward, her daughter will not have to experience the hurt and the pain that Lorelai has had to experience.
Yeah, I think she'll get there eventually, but I do think she, in this moment, I think that trauma is just still present with her. So I think there is an element of worrying that she will accidentally do the exact same thing that Emily did.
Or that Rory will get pregnant.
And
do the exact same thing that Lorelai did.
Yeah.
And she said this before. She has said this in earlier episodes. You're me, you're going to get pregnant. And we know that she's not. And we can tell that that is not going to happen here. Rory is a different person. She's not, well, for one thing, Lorelai, one of the reasons Lorelai was probably being sexually active at an early age was a reaction to her parents and their rigidity.
Yeah.
And Rory doesn't have that rigidity to bounce off of. And plus she's just a different, she's a calmer person. She's more reserved. You can see that she is focused on Harvard, man. She is not going to give up Harvard.
Yeah. Also, the specific thing that Lorelai sees is them holding hands.
Which is sweet and innocent.
Innocent, yeah. So that brings us to the end of the episode.
Yep,
any final thoughts?
This episode was not as dynamic as the other episodes have been up till now, but at the same time, it was a really important episode. Yeah. And I remember halfway through it thinking, I hope this picks up a little bit. But then at the end, I thought there were some really emotional scenes in here, some really important scenes. And at the end, I remember thinking, this is a damn good show. It's a really good show. So, what about you?
Yeah, I do think this episode kind of dialed down the usual humor in exchange for layered emotional moments.
Yeah.
And I think Kelly Bishop is the star of this episode.
It was her episode. Yeah, it was her.
Yeah.
It was her story to tell. Well, so that, dear listeners, is all for today.
Yes, I'm Tess Adair. You can find me at my website, tessadair.com, which is TESSADAIR.com, where you can sign up for my email list. Or you can follow me on Instagram at author.tess.adair or on Twitter at authortessadair, all one word.
And I'm Beth Von Barron. You can find me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth. This has been Where You Lead, our brilliant and fun new podcast about the Gilmore Girls from the perspective of a mother and daughter. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll tune in for our next episode in 2 weeks. See you then.
Yep, see you then.